the Local Government in Scotland Act 2003, myself as directed, this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. Also, we are here in the Foundry as well, certain officers and myself. The meeting will also be live streamed if anybody's watching from outside, and the address is www.falkirk.gov.uk live for people, all members outside, to view this as well. A wee bit of housekeeping first is keep your camera on if you don't mind. It's really good to see people, and keep yourself muted unless you've got a question to ask. And I would also like to say very welcome. We've got 2 new members. We've got Councillor Robert Spears from Falkirk Council, and we've also got Nicola Griffin from NHS Forth Valley. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of this. Thank you. I'm now going to start the business. Firstly, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
We do, Convener. Thanks. We've got apologies from Andy Douglas and from Councillor Brian Quinn from Claremont Shore Council.
Thank you. 2, declarations of interest. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at this meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. No, nobody has any interest. I'll move. Oh, Councillor Spears, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, I believe I'm in the council pension scheme. As you know, most elected members are on the minimum wage, so it's a very minimal pension.
Thanks very much, Councillor Spears. We'll note that. Thank you. Oh,
you're very welcome.
Just to say that's not, you don't need to declare that every time, Councillor Spears. There's an exclusion or exemption in the code that recognises that councillors and in fact employees are on here will be in receipt of the pension themselves, but they're still able to participate and fully in the meeting. Thank you.
You're aware we are public, and it's best to have this registered.
Thank you, Councillor Spears. We're going to move on now to the minute. That's the minute of the joint meeting of the Pensions Committee and Board that took place on the 22nd of September 2022. It's actually pages 3 to 10. So if you maybe just take a minute to have a quick look over it, or perhaps you have. I'll give you a minute.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Now we're going to quickly move on to general governance matters, and the report will be taken by Catherine Carruthers. Thank you.
So the general governance matters just covers a broad range of issues that affect the pension scheme. And I'll start with the UK Pensions Dashboard Programme. This programme aims to provide a digital platform which enables people to access information about all of their pension savings, including their state pension, in one place. Since writing this report, the regulations which set out the requirements for pension schemes to connect to the Pensions Dashboard were made on the 21st of November and come into force on the 12th of December. Additionally, the Pensions Regulator has launched a consultation on its draft dashboards compliance and enforcement policy. The draft policy sets out the key risk areas the regulator will focus on, what the regulator expects schemes to do when complying with their dashboard duties, how the regulator will monitor compliance, and how the regulator will approach non-compliance. The policy reiterates the powers the regulator has to deal with non-compliance, and this includes compliance and penalty notices, and these can be issued to third parties such as employers, administrators, and integrated service providers who integrated service providers. These are the people who provide the connection between the pension fund and the pensions dashboard. Although the regulations allow the pension fund to apply to the DWP for a deferment of their staging date, our pension fund is on track to meet its staging date of the 30th of September 2024. Over the coming pension committee meetings and board meetings, we will be continuously coming back to pensions dashboard as we make ourselves ready for that onboarding so that you're kept up to date with progress. The next item is with regard to how pensions will increase on the first Monday following the 5th of April 2023. Government has confirmed its policy, it's standing by its policy, so we're expecting pensions to increase by 10.1%, specifically deferred pensions, pensions in payment, and the care pensions, that's a pension built up after the 1st of April 2015, for active members. We've also recently submitted our data quality scores, which we are required to do by the pensions regulator. And as you'll note from the report, you can see that our scheme-specific data, the quality has increased steadily over the last 5 years to 90%, and the common data has remained consistently steady at 99%. Where we're seeing the data gaps for the common data, that's generally in addressee gone away, as in people have moved and they've not bothered to tell us their new address. For the scheme-specific data, the majority of the data now failing relates to longer-standing pensioners whose pensions are clearly in payment, where less comprehensive member records have been maintained. However, that missing data is not material to the calculation and payment of the members' benefits. The final item relates to climate change reporting. It does relate to climate change reporting proposals for the LGPS in England and Wales. And it does look at their view to bringing in regulations that would see English and Welsh funds assess, manage and report on climate-related risks. And that's in line with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. I'm going to refer to that as TCFD because that's the way it's generally referred to within the pensions community. What this regulation seeks to do is to align local government pension funds with what private sector pension schemes are required to do. Specifically, trustees of private sector's pension schemes where the net relevant assets of the scheme are 1 billion or more, they need to demonstrate in their annual climate change or TCFD report that they have identified, assessed and managed climate-related risks and opportunities. So why is this relevant to Scottish funds? Well, Scottish funds traditionally let England and Wales go full steam ahead, lay it, and then we sit there and go, good, bad, definitely not having, good, bad, we'll keep that. And then we lay our regulations. So we're expecting to see something very similar to what England and Wales bring out, which will probably be in 2023, probably come to force in Scotland towards the end of 2023 or 2024. That's me.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm now going to open it up to the Pension Committee and Board. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Nicola?
Sorry, could I just ask, in regards to the dashboard, the staging date's 2024. When will members start to be able to access the online system?
So that's referred to as a data availability point. Mm-hmm. The dashboard is due to start, I think, schemes, private sector schemes will start onboarding next year.
Okay.
So it will be available for members of those schemes from next year. For public service schemes, all public service schemes have a staging date of the 30th of September 2024. And the reason for that, the reason why we're quite late is because we've got the McLeod remedy to implement, which is the protection that was afforded to members when we moved from a final salary arrangement to a care arrangement.
Okay, that's good. That sounds good.
Thank you, Nicola. We've now got Mr. Morgan. You've got a question, please?
Thanks, convener. Catherine, it's just, this may be too early to answer this question, and it might well be better to wait until the triennial revaluation, but the very high inflation rate, the 10.1%, that will affect the liabilities, do we have an indication at this stage as to how that might impact the funding level, which looked particularly rosy in the annual report and accounts?
Yeah, the answer is it is too early. We don't have an idea. Yes, it will impact, but there are a variety of things impacting the valuation and our funding level. At the moment, I would say we're in a typical gilts bubble. Stuart might correct me, but the gilts, because of the way gilts are at the moment, that is really bringing down the liabilities massively. So we've got the interaction of increases to pensions plus how favourable the markets are at the moment. So it is too early. We will have to wait for the triennial valuation results to know exactly what impact that has had on our funding. It's very time specific, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, just to add to that, just because you've mentioned my name there, Catherine. Yeah, I mean, I would reiterate what Catherine says there. I mean, obviously, inflation will have an impact. We don't really know as yet, but Catherine touched on the liabilities. But obviously, if you look at the progress or the gain that we've seen in the assets as well since the last valuation, the funding level should be in a reasonably good position, although I would point out that there are obviously uncertainties with regards to sort of future market direction, but certainly with the liability, the movement in the liabilities and the assets, the funding level should be looking in a good position currently.
Thank you. We now have a question from Councillor Spears. Do you have a question?
I have three questions actually.
Thank you.
First, you mentioned regulation. Will that be available for us to read the regulation regarding this?
Yeah, that's on legislation.gov.uk. You can do a search.
Secondly, will we be tied into I believe the government's triple lock, where pensions will rise with the rate of inflation?
So the triple lock is specific to the state pension. We only track the move in consumer prices index on the triple lock. We don't do the average earnings or anything like that. We simply follow the move in consumer prices index, and that move is between each September. So the move in the consumer prices index between September last year and September this year was 10.1%. So that's what we're expecting the pensions to increase by.
So you're not putting a lock on at 5%, that you're going to go in the full 10.1%, did you say?
So, yes, so the 5% that you're referring to is a typical limit applied in private sector pensions. Some private sector pensions do go as high as 10%, but it's quite rare. And in the private sector, they do have a limit. They will only increase up to, as I said, 5% or sometimes 10%. But for the local government pension scheme, we are fully inflation proofed. So we will do the full inflation. So if it was 20%, we would do 20%.
And my third question is on climate change. You mentioned the south of England, which is a much warmer area than cold Scotland. Will there be any cognizance of the cost of living rise regarding energy for different locations?
It's not that kind of climate related financial disclosures. It's more to do with how our investments are affecting climate change. So, for example, it'll come clearer, probably I'll cover it in the voting and engagement. is how we engage in our what's called typically termed ESG, so environment, social and governance principles. And what the TCFD, the climate related financial disclosures, are trying to capture is how we invest, how is that impacting on climate change? Is it resulting in, carbon emissions going up, or is it resulting in carbon emissions coming down? We use an engagement specialist to work with the companies in our portfolio to bring carbon emissions down. Does that help?
Well, that could lead to a whole level of debate, since carbon companies, special oil companies, are making great profits just now, so it would increase our pension earnings if we had investments in them. So it's a whole different debate, that, and it's maybe something we should look into realistically.
Yeah, there are products that we could look into that would give a clearer reporting line on that. With regard to oil companies, it's not just the fact that they have oil, but they are also investing in renewables. So it's that just transition from oil to a renewable that we're also looking at, and how we push through.
Well, I look forward to maybe that coming back as a debate for the Pensions Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Spears. Any further questions? No. I just want to make a comment. I just want to say that I'm sure I'm sure nearly all the retired members will be pleased that the increase to the pension will be 10.1%, though I note that it's still to be confirmed by the government in Q1, quartile 1 of 2023. So I invite you all to note the contents of this report. Agreed? Great, thank you. We're now moving on. We're moving on now to agenda item 5, which is investment review, and it's by Stuart Petrovich. Excuse me if I've not pronounced it correctly.
No, that's very good.
Thank you. So if you could give that presentation, thank you, that would be great.
Perfect. Thanks very much for that. And yeah, I mean, I guess just for those of you who I haven't met, I am Stuart Petrovich. I'm one of the equity portfolio managers at Lothian Pension Fund, and I'm also an advisor on the Joint Investment Strategy Panel. So in Bruce's absence, I'll spend a few minutes talking to the investment update paper today. So in terms of the investment market backdrop, it's fair to say that things have been very interesting recently. It probably won't surprise you to hear that it's been touched on already on this call, but that inflation and the central bank efforts to control inflation have been a big focus for markets. So volatility has also been heightened by the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine and ongoing supply chain issues. So in terms of market action, equities were notably weak in US dollar terms, down just short of 7% in the third quarter. But as has been a feature for some time, US dollar strength or sterling weakness meant that equities in sterling terms made modest gains in the quarter. Bonds didn't escape either, with gilts experiencing double-digit declines over the quarter. And that's actually meant that over 15-year index-linked gilts fell just short of 40% in the first 9 months of 2022, and that's for a supposed risk-free asset. Things got particularly interesting at the end of the quarter when the very short-lived Truss government announced their mini-budget, and the resulting action in the gilt market forced the Bank of England to intervene and buy gilts to try and restore some market order. So very, very significant declines there. Table 2 in 4.3 of the paper shows the change in asset allocation for Falkirk Pension Fund over the last 12 months. And from that, I would highlight a few things. Falkirk started the year at less than half weighted against the strategic target in LDI or gilts. and that was given concerns around valuation of those assets. And Falkirk have taken advantage of the weakness in gilts, notably at the end of September, to move much closer to target. Equities have also been reduced towards the 60% target over the year. And real assets have increased as Falkirk have continued to identify new investments, and because these assets have held up better in performance terms, although I would note that there does tend to be a lag in valuations here. And the final thing to comment on that table is Falkirk have now fully exited from the position in the Baillie Gifford Diversified Growth Fund. So in terms of fund returns, the Q3 return was minus 0.6%, although that was ahead of the benchmark return of minus 5.1%. Short-term returns can be volatile, and we'd always prefer to focus on longer-term figures. So we'd note that the 5-year figure is reasonable in absolute terms at plus 5.9%, and since inception returns are plus 7.4% per annum, and both of these are comfortably ahead of benchmark. And as we touched on earlier, with regards to funding level, with the fund's assets having moved notably higher since the last valuation, and with interest rates also notably higher, we would expect the funding level to have improved. Underlying returns by manager are shown in the table in the appendices, along with the fund's private market commitments and the mandate benchmarks and objectives. But with that, I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petrovich. That is a very detailed presentation there. I'm now going to open it up to the Pension Committee and Board. Does Angie have any questions at all? Councillor Steinbank, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, convener, and thanks to David for that comprehensive thing. It was just an elaboration on the table at 4.3. I just note that cash has increased over what I think you've explained quite aptly was quite a volatile market over the last 3 months. Perhaps just some elaboration on that and whether we anticipate that to decline over the next financial year, considering that market volatility, in line with what happened, I can see from September 2021 onwards. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, cash has increased somewhat, and I suppose in line more recently, and in line with the sort of Lothian and Fife pension funds, we all have a reasonable cash position. We wouldn't expect for any of the funds to have a reasonable cash position in the long term, but I think we would note that similar to our thinking at the end of last year, we do think there's going to continue to be ongoing volatility and the potential to take advantage of that volatility, and therefore having slightly more cash than you would normally for liquidity purposes is probably sensible. Valuations within equities and within gilts are, you could argue, still reasonably extended. So I think the cash is there to potentially take advantage of opportunities that may arise, because we certainly think there will be ongoing volatility, given the fact you've got this very difficult balance of central banks trying to have set rates at an appropriate level to control inflation, and we think that sort of that difficulty there will manifest itself in volatility within markets that we would hope to take advantage of.
Thank you very much.
And I've got Amanda to come in to answer your question too.
Yeah, thanks, convener. It was just very briefly to say, obviously this is the figure as at the 30th of September. We have actually been making a few investments in the last quarter, so that cash figure has reduced from what it is in this report. So it has gone down, but we were aware of having to have enough cash for some of the investments that we could see that were potentially coming down the line. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did I see Councillor Spears had his hand up? Or
yeah, my question was partially answered by Stuart. Have the markets settled enough after the mini budget, which seems to be taking the blame for everything? And you're talking about the long term over 5 years. That's quite a crystal ball to look in, quite a distance. We really are interested in the short term, and you mentioned something about a depreciation of 5.5%. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I get the gist of the question. Apologies for that. In terms of the decline of 5.5%, yeah, I'm not sure I quite get the gist of the question. Apologies. Do you want to repeat that?
I think
the 5.5 might have been the benchmark return. So essentially over the quarter, the fund was brought. I mean, I think I gave you very specific numbers, but the fund was broadly flat over the quarter, whereas the benchmark return was down about 5%. And part of the reason for that is within the benchmark, some of the assets, it's very difficult to find an appropriate benchmark for those assets. Now, the gilt assets are benchmarked against gilts, and I've already touched on that they were notably weak. But the real asset exposure, so your property and your infrastructure exposure, is also benchmarked against gilts. Now, it's not a good short-term comparison because that's nothing like what we're invested in, and therefore the differential in return between your infrastructure and your property assets over the quarter, where I think we probably saw close to double-digit returns, or certainly strong returns, they far outperformed the gilts that were declining double digits, and therefore there is that quite significant mismatch. So that, yeah, there is quite a notable performance differential there.
On assets, it'll be interesting to see how we progress as we go through asset realisation in the council.
Thank you, Councillor Spears. We have another question from Mr. Morrison, please.
Hi, thanks, convener. It's kind of similar to the point David Morgan was making on the last item. The actuaries, the impact of inflation again, the actuaries will obviously need to revisit their salary assumptions, given that we've had historically low levels over the last few years, and they're now creeping up and likely to stay higher for maybe a period of time. While I accept that we will need to wait to the next valuation to fully understand the impact of all that, I think we've had early warning reports in the past, and it might be useful to programme that in for the earliest point possible next year. It helps in financial planning, if nothing else, but I wonder if that might be something we could return to during the course of 2023, rather than waiting to what I think would be March 24, probably, before getting the full results of the next triennial valuation.
So part of the triennial valuation process is that we will, after the 31st March next year, we will take a cut of data, we will send it to the actuary. That cut of data will probably occur round about July, because we will have processing to do to get the data as at the 31st of March firmed up as much as possible, as we get leave forms in from employers, etc. Then the next phase is the actuary does their calculations, and then we will speak with our employers to tell them these are the initial results and to discuss and the contribution setting. So that is built into the process, and that will happen before the valuation is finalised and the rates and adjustment certificate is set.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison, for your question. Any further questions? No? Right, the recommendations are: the committee and board are asked to note recent investment market developments, the fund's strategic allocation, the fund's performance for the period ending 30th September 2022, and the investment monitoring activity of the GISP. Agreed?
Agreed. Agreed.
Thank you. We're moving on again to agenda item 6, which is engagement and voting activity, and Catherine Carruthers will take this.
Okay, so the voting and engagement report is literally about how we use our vote for the companies that we are invested in and how we engage with those companies. We as a fund use a dedicated engagement specialist, called Hermes EOS, and they've been appointed for a period of 4 years. We're almost through the first of that 4 years. Hermes provide us with 3 public reports each quarter. The first is a voting report, and this shows us the number of votable meetings that were held during the quarter and an overview of how our votes were cast. The second is an engagement report, which shows the split of engagements by region and theme. And the final one is a public engagement report commenting on the engagements that have taken place in the quarter. These reports have been appended to this report. I should have said the Hermes reports are appended to this voting and engagement report. And as I said, it sets out the work that Hermes have undertaken on our behalf in Q3 of this year. So that is June to September. It's also a highlights report, which is not a public report. This has been uploaded to the SharePoint portal, and the committee and board are asked to treat this report as confidential. Over the last quarter, Hermes made voting recommendations at 10 meetings. That was 182 resolutions. At 3 meetings, they recommended opposing 1 or more of the resolutions that were made. They also recommended voting with management by exception at 1 meeting and supported management on all resolutions at the remaining 6 meetings. Oh, that's me.
Right, thank you, Catherine. I'm now going to open up for, is there any questions from the board and the committee? I've got Mr. Morgan, got a question?
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Catherine. Yeah, it's hate to sound a little bit like a broken record, and it's not so much feedback on the report itself. Clearly, Hermes doing good work in terms of engagement. It was just a reminder that we still aren't tracking where we deem engagement to be failing. And in our statement of responsible investment principles, it talks about divestment as a last resort, and I do recognise that it's there as a last resort following engagement, but I remain a little concerned that we're not tracking how individual organisations are moving towards that point where we would consider divestment, and I'd ask the committee and the fund to just consider whether or not that's something we might be able to do sooner rather than later to give our members some confidence that we're taking this seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. That was a very good question, and it's important, I think, to be able to track that at this moment in time, when climate change and net zero and all that is in everybody's minds. Thank you. Do we have any further questions at all? No further questions. So the recommendations are the Pensions Committee and Pension Board are invited to note and comment on the contents of this report and the reports provided by Hermes EOS. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Now moving on. It's agenda item 7, and I'll just mention after this agenda item, after that will be exclusion of the public. So if anybody's watching just now, you'll not be able to view it online. So agenda item 7 is merger update, and it's by Amanda Templeton.
Thank you, convener. So the paper in front of you is quite a brief one, and it provides an update on the work being undertaken to prepare for the proposed merger of the Council Pension Fund and Lothian Pension Fund. So there's, I suppose, sort of 2 main elements or work streams. There's the work stream for the merger specifically, and there's the work stream what we've referred to previously as levelling up activity. So we'll give us a brief update on both of those areas in this report. We previously mentioned, or we previously noted at committee that we had anticipated bringing an updated business case to this meeting, and clearly that's not the case. Section 4 of the report covers the overall project update and highlights that the project at this point is assessed as amber. Where we are is that work's ongoing to review the advice received on the proposed merger and to look at the various structure models that have been under consideration and the sort of pros and cons of all of those models. We are nearly at the end of that work, I would say, and we've got a series of meetings scheduled in December, early January, to refine, agree and then prepare the reports for both the Pension Committee and the Council. So based on our current committee dates as it stands, the full report with the updated business case and advice would be brought to the Pensions Committee in March next year. And then a report would go to Council thereafter. So what we're aiming for is agreement on the way forward from the Pensions Committee in Q1 and then taking that to Council in Q2. That's the proposal. If I just go back and touch a little bit on the other sort of 3 main updates, there's 4 main areas that the report updates the committee on. So that's the overall project statement. We talk about levelling up activity in the report. And the main area of development in that respect is progress towards the implementation of the members' self-serve area. So we've noted in the report that we went live with this in November with the aim to go live in December for pension members and in January for all other members. So there's been a huge amount of work done by the team to get to that point, and I'd just like to put on record thanks to everyone for all the hard work to get us there. So as noted later on in the report, paragraph 3.4.1, the section is currently fully resourced to support all the levelling up work that needs to be carried out. I think we have to note that although this is part of the merger update, the work was always planned, but I think it is fair to say that we had to accelerate it as a result of some of the work that was happening on the proposed merger. We refer in the report to the funding strategy statement. And as we've set out previously, the intention is to use the Lothian funding strategy statement as a basis for developing the funding strategy statement for a new merged entity. Again, we expected to bring that to today's meeting, but we are still working on that area. We've been meeting with the team from Lothian Pension Fund, we've been meeting with actuaries from both the funds, to consider that work in some detail and understand all the issues and implications and the options that are available for the funding strategy statement. So it's a work in progress, and what I would say is the key aim of the work is to make sure that we're avoiding any shock changes to contribution rates that would result from a change in the funding strategy statement. So as I've noted at paragraph 3.2.3, the fund's draft funding strategy statement is expected to be presented at the next joint committee and board meeting. So again, at this point, that's in March. And then if it's approved, that would be subject to employer consultation. And then finally, in terms of staff engagement, section 3.3 covers that area and talks about some of the mechanisms we have for keeping staff up to date. In paragraph 3.3.2, we've made reference to the Lothian Pension Fund team members visiting the Foundry, and just to add an update to that, that earlier this week, members of the Falkirk team visited Lothian Pension Fund offices, worked there for the day, mainly to see some of the developments that are in train in Falkirk through the levelling up activity. And happily, these visits, I think, particularly where the teams are undertaking similar tasks and working together, they've gone well so far. They've been well received, and there's a real sense of sort of joint learning and development between the teams. So that's really positive. We are planning to send out a further joint communication piece this week to all staff. So as outlined before, a joint communication comes from myself and the Chief Executive of Lothian Pension Fund, David Valerie, and it's sent to all the staff in the Lothian Pension Fund and the Falkirk pension team. So we are planning to do that full close play tomorrow. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Do we have any questions at all? I believe we've got several questions. I'm not sure who was first, so I'll go to Councillor Steenbank.
Thank you, convener. It's just a couple of questions for Amanda. On 3.2.2, you talk about basically checking over the new FSS for the sort of new entity. What is the risk for there being sudden changes to employer contribution rates? If we could just get a bit of elaboration on that. And then it's also in the process of remitting, if this is approved by this committee in March 2023, remitting it to full council. I had a quick look at the schedule. I believe that wouldn't be until late June, I believe the 28th of June 2023. So what work would be taking place post, if this committee does approve in March 2023, over 3 months, I believe, and what risks are associated with such a long wait for potential full council approval? Thank you.
Okay, if I start with the second question, I mean, ultimately we can't progress fully until we have council approval. So there's we can go to a certain point and then everything will have to stop until council approve. I think we have a project plan that's very, very detailed. There's hundreds of lines that set out what we need to do in advance of council approval, but what really needs council approval to be taken forward. And what I would say is, depending on where we get to, there is the potential for us to seek a special meeting, for example, if we wanted to try and accelerate some of the decision making around this. I think the first quarter of the year is really difficult to do that because of all the budget pressures and the budget meetings and things that are happening. So, and that's partly the reason that we've deferred to some extent. I think the risk around if it was June, for example, is around if it was approved in June, then the timing of when the merger would actually take place, and would we have enough time to get all the sort of legal processes, documentation processes and things out of the way. So I think at this point we can't be too definitive about our actual merger date, because we need to understand what the time frame is going to be for approval and how that will then impact on the merger date. So for us, the focus for the pension team in Falkirk is really on the levelling up activity that we would have wanted to do in any case. And behind the scenes, we are myself, David Valley from Lothian Pension Fund, Colin Moody from Falkirk Council, and the equivalents in Lothian Pension Fund, City of Edinburgh Council. We're all meeting to look at all the legal questions, all the HMRC advice. We're sort of working our way through that, and so that and meeting with Deloitte to go through their business case and ask questions and things. So work is still going on, but certainly there is a risk depending on how far it slips, I suppose. In terms of your first question, the financial strategy statement, I think, you know, Catherine might want to come in because she has a lot more expertise in this area than I do. But I suppose ultimately the actuarial valuation is based on a wide number of assumptions. And the risk is that the Lothian Pension Fund's funding strategy statement and Falkirk's funding strategy statement are based on different assumptions, and that then could potentially result in a material difference. Now, in most cases, I think the assumptions are fairly aligned. We've worked together for quite a long time, but there are certain areas where we do have different assumptions. We also have sort of, there is mechanisms for stabilising contribution rates and things. So for a lot of employers, and particularly for the big employers, we wouldn't expect to see any significant shocks in their contribution rate because of the stability mechanism. So what we're trying to do is just work our way through what those assumptions mean. First of all, trying to understand what are the differences in assumptions, why one's picked one set of assumptions and someone's picked the other one, what impact those assumptions have, and trying, I mean, it is an opportunity for both funds to look at their assumptions and say, is that right? Is that prudent? Is that the way it should be? Or is that one better? Or is there a different way that both the funds could approach it? So it's quite a sort of detailed exercise. The actuaries are pulling a lot of information together for us. We've got further meetings. We've recently had a report from one of the actuaries, and we're setting up a meeting with Lothian Pension Fund to go through and discuss that. So it'll be a bit of a drawn out process, but as I say, the main aim is to make sure that there are shocks for any of our employers.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Steinbach?
Yeah, thank you very much, and especially for, well, the second question I asked, but the one that was answered first. I do imagine a special council meeting could be arranged, but I know that the 28th of June, that might not be the only one in Q2. I know there's quite a lot of volatility in the schedule with the town hall closure. So thanks very much, Amanda. Very detailed answer, answered comprehensively. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a further 2 questions. Mr. Cleary.
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much. My questions are surrounding the. I think what sounds to me like it's almost going to be an avalanche of things that we're going to have to agree come the end of March, which is 4 months away, if things start gathering momentum and moving forward. I personally think what we probably need to do is, I don't think we can push the next meeting, the board and the committee out as far as March. I think we probably have to convene sooner, because I think there'll be bits and pieces coming together rather quickly. And as I say, rather than have an avalanche of things that we're looking at, and I'm particularly concerned about the governance model going forward, because we've had no real overview of what that's potentially going to look like. So my proposal is that pushing our next committee meeting and board meeting out until the end of March is maybe too far away. And I think maybe we have to consider pulling something in between December and March. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thanks for your convener. What I would say is that, I mean, I think certainly we will have to take a step back, look at everything that we're bringing forward, and make sure that in governance terms we're bringing forward a complete package that we're members of the committee have all the information that they need to make a competent decision. So that is incumbent on us as officers. What I would say is that, and what I should have said earlier, is that I would anticipate there will need to be a series of briefings and sessions held with the committee and board to take you through these papers and the issues and all the discussions in advance of that March meeting. So I think you're absolutely right. Just sort of dropping all that in on March without that wouldn't be appropriate at all. So we will need to try and work back from that date and work out what sessions we need to put in place to make sure that everyone's fully sort of understanding, fully aware of the issues, fully understands the issues, having an opportunity to consider, to take it away, to think about it, come back to us. So we will make sure that is the case.
No, thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cleary. And now we have Mr. Wilson, David Wilson. Do you have a question, please?
Yeah, I've got a couple here. Obviously, we're looking at you know, what's right for taking the pension funds together with merger, but I'm curious to see if there's been an impact assessment of what the ancillary positions within Falkirk Council that support the actual Falkirk LGPS just now. What the likely implications are going to be to staff. I mean, obviously you get ICT services, you get use of pooled cars, you get use of you know, the council's cleaners, facility management. Has anybody actually done an impact assessment of what's going to happen once we do take? And I do know that you're looking at potentially having an office still in Falkirk of some sort. But I just wondered if that work had been carried out to see, obviously, because that's going to be important when Falkirk Council itself look at this. Another thing I would say as well, obviously, I represent, you know, Carrickmannanshire Unison, and you know, I mean, this decision's getting taken by Falkirk. So I was just thinking, is there something that maybe the other partners I know we're here and we're on this framework, but I just wondered, you know, obviously it's going to a council meeting of sorts, but obviously there's no representation there from the other bodies, and I just wondered what's the thoughts about trying to include the other partners, if it's not just through this, but through the wider councils. I was thinking about, so it's me really thinking out loud, so apologies if I'm saying something that I shouldn't be saying. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Sorry, convener. And if I maybe start, and then Catherine may want to jump in with some thoughts as well. I think if we take the first one, we have been working with our HR team. So the project team, we have an HR representative from Falkirk Council and an HR representative from Lothian Pension Fund, and we've been, so there's a number of work streams. One of them is the people work stream, so sort of working our way through what all the issues are, what the comms needs to be, what discussions we need to have. And I think I'd mentioned before, although I may have my time is a little bit mixed up, that we'd had a session with staff, an initial session with all staff to ask for their views and concerns and things like that. So we're working our way through that still, and obviously we would have to, for Falkirk staff, have to go through that formal 2-pay process. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. In terms of the impact on Falkirk Council, I think we recognise that although it's a very important team, and they do a lot of work in Falkirk Council staffing terms, it's a fairly small proportion, a very small proportion of the Falkirk Council staff. So in terms of impact on, for example, council cleaners and things, I wouldn't see it having any impact. It would be, you know, if the team weren't based in the Foundry, I don't think that would change either the sort of level of IT support that the Foundry needs or the level of cleaning support and catering support that would need. It's not a big enough team to make that kind of significant difference. But we are committed to that Falkirk office. We're still trying to work through options with that. And so, and you know, potentially one of the options may be that we sort of have the team in the Foundry going forward, and there's not that significant change. So we just need to still work through what's possible. So I'm not anticipating a significant impact on Falkirk Council staff. I would say that Lothian Pension Fund is set up in a very different way to Falkirk Pension Fund, as we talked about before. So they will have their own ICT department, their own HR department, their own legal department, and which is obviously very different to the way we are set up. So I would expect that if that merger happens, the level of ICT support from, for example, Falkirk Council would reduce, but it wouldn't reduce enough to impact on the numbers in that team, for example. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so David, picking up on your point about an actual equality poverty impact assessment taking place, that is in train, and I have made contact with the relevant officer to get that started. But building on what Amanda has already said, we're really not expecting there to be any significant impact, although roles are changing. For example, there is no pension manager post in the new entity. Under the heads of terms where we agreed the principles of the merger, there is a legally binding requirement that there will be no job losses and that people will be given roles that are commensurate with the roles they held pre-merger. So people should be treated no differently before or after. 2P takes care of a lot of the employment issues. Our pensioners and our scheme members, the benefits are all set under legislation so that it's a statutory requirement that they get the benefits they get. Their benefits are not going to change in any way, shape or form. And the payment date, believe it or not, because we have been working together for a long time, Lothian and Falkirk both have the same payday for their pensioners. So the payday for our pensioners won't change either. So in reality, yes, the body that's going to administer will look different, but in principle and in practice, you will see no change.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Wilson?
It's good to hear that that's been considered. I just think that we before a decision is made, and I take your points. I just think the full information needs to be provided. So if there could be an impact assessment provided, it would be very useful for the people making the decision. I know what it's like when you've got to make decisions, and after the decision's made, you go, oh, but nobody told us about that, and how many times have I heard that when I've been working for a council? So it's just good to know that it's being considered. I just hope that the impact assessment and information like that will be made available. Thank you.
And then do you want to come back in?
Thanks, convener. David, I think I'm just, you also asked about the other partners being involved in the decision making, and I think it's something I'll take back and have further consideration, ask or get further advice, I suppose, from our legal team. But ultimately, it's Falkirk Council that's the administering authority, and it's Falkirk Council that has to take the decision on whether they remain the administering authority or not. And the reality is that is, from my understanding, from legal advice we've had to date, that is a decision that is purely for Falkirk Council to take. I think what we do need to do is make sure that we are communicating well with all the partners and employers that are involved, and we do have a comms strategy for that. So I don't think that there would be an opportunity for other partners to be involved in the actual taking of the decision, but obviously other partners would have the opportunity to let their views be known before the decision.
And on that point, I just want to make it, and I totally understand we maybe feel like we're falling off a cliff edge at the moment, and it's maybe not too obvious at the moment. Totally get that, but I'm quite reassured, Amanda, saying that we will all get briefing sessions in advance and of the next committee, and when we do have them, we can ask questions at that point. And I think after all these briefing sessions, I think they will be really, really helpful for us. Will be really informative, and obviously, at that point, if we've got any questions we want to ask, we'll have those questions, and we'll also have these answers before we come to the next committee in March. And I think we will feel quite assured at that point. We will all be very informed about making the decision. That's all I wanted to say there. Okay. So, if there's no more questions, the Pensions Committee. Oh, sorry, Tony.
Sorry, thank you, convener. It's just before we kind of jump into the closed session part. There's something I think we need to keep our eye on. National Care Service. Now, nobody really knows what that means at this moment in time, but potentially you're looking at 75,000 people getting pulled out of the public, out of local government. That's going to have an impact on pension funds. It doesn't matter how you cut that. Now, one of the rumours that I've picked up is, let's say on average the employer's contribution is maybe around about 20% at the moment. That's an average figure. The rumour mill's stating at the moment that the new entity will have an employer's contribution of 6%. Now, that's going to have a massive impact on individuals and their pension pots, but it's also going to impact on current pension pots across the whole of Scotland if it does actually happen. So I just think that's something we should keep our eye on and maybe have as a wee standing item on the agenda going forward until we actually know what's going to happen with this National Care Service.
Yeah.
So, sorry, thank you.
No, Tony, don't go away. Forgive my ignorance. What are you meaning when you're talking about this National Care Service? Is this people being taken out of NHS and put into LGPS, or?
No, it's actually people being taken out of local government and stuck into a National Care Service. The public seem to think that this is all going to be, it's just another part of the NHS. But the way the legislation is looking at the moment, it entirely seems to be down to ministerial direction. Yeah. And the way it's sounding at the moment is that a local authority, while its staff may transfer out, the local authority will not be able to bid to provide any of these care services that they currently provide. So, that's going to go to private sector, third sector.
Okay, so in that we have other legislation that comes into play. And basically one of the things that we rely on, which is again why I said we don't expect impact for staff who transfer to Lothian, is if you transfer a local government employee into the private sector, they have pension protection. 2P only covers your employment rights. It doesn't include pension, but there is specific pension protection for local government employees, and therefore they must be given broadly comparable benefits. So they will not be worse off. They will have to be given benefits that are broadly comparable to the local government pension scheme, or it will be a case of these new bodies will be required to become admitted bodies of the LGPS funds. So those people will still retain their LGPS type. And what we would see is that if it is a new employer, then we would value that group of people, what is the contribution rate for that group of people, and that will be determined by an actuary who'll be looking at how much service and care pension these people have built up that are going to be forming in this new employer and their age range, and that will inform their contribution rate. So 6% is probably unlikely.
Right. Okay. Okay. It's just the sheer amount of people potentially moving out across the whole of Scotland. 75,000 is a chunk of bodies, and it's probably a big chunk of pension contribution. That was the only reason I thought we should keep an eye on it.
Yeah, I still think, yeah, I would agree.
Thank you.
If I could just jump in there as well and say I absolutely agree. What I would say is so the chief finance officers for the local authorities provided a section-based response to the financial memorandum that was distributed as part of the National Care Service. And in that, we had highlighted the lack of clarity around the pension arrangements, and particularly flagged up that we needed clarity on whether those in the National Care Service whether the National Care Service would be an admitted member of the local government pension scheme. So I think the sense from us was that there was really no sort of clear understanding of how it was going to work at this point in time. But certainly I haven't heard anything about sort of 6% contributions and that kind of significant change, and I would be surprised if that happened, to be honest. But I think you're right. I think it's certainly something that we should keep an eye on, but we haven't had I've not had an update for some time from the response from when we submitted our response to the financial memorandum. I've not seen an update to that.
Thank you.
I think it's a situation where if people don't actually have the information coming at it, they kind of make it up, and quite often it's not absolutely correct, but it plugs a gap, and I think we've got a danger of that happening with this. So yeah, I do think it has to be kept on the bubble. We do have to be aware of it in the background.
Thank you, Mr. Cleary, for highlight. Appreciate that. Does anyone have any further questions at all? No. So we're now going to make the recommendation. The Pensions Committee and Pension Board are asked to note the contents of this update about the merger. Agreed?
Agreed.
So before we go into exclusion in the public, we're just going to take a wee 5-minute break, put the kettle on or whatever, but it'll just be for 5 minutes. Thank you. Sorry. So before that, it's exclusion of the public. It's resolved. So I'll read this little bit.
Even if you want to, it's just in the agenda we've got the exclusion of the public paragraph.
Yes.
It's just to ask the committee to agree to go into private session by excluding the public.
So do you agree to go into private session, committee?
Agreed.
Thank you. 5-minute break. Thank you. I also get parts of it, actually.